In the blink of an eye, this car crash tore 84 lives apart. No, this is not a scene from a horror movie. This was the day a car crash decapitated 14 people and killed 69 more at the 1955 Le Mans disaster. We hope you have a strong stomach. This is going to be intense. Let us begin. Before the 11th of June, 1955, race car drivers raised concerns about the non-existence of enough safety measures in motorsports. Quickly, a meeting was set, and the race drivers came up with several measures to keep the death toll in motorsports minimal. And after long hours of begging the governing council to get rid of seatbelts because they, the race car drivers, would rather be thrown out of a car during an accident than burn to death, their wish was granted. However, this very law change was exactly why Pierre Levesque's skull flattened immediately when he hit the track after being thrown out of his car. It's not an easy image to forget. But wait, let's back up a bit and start the story from the very beginning. If humans had foresight and could see the future, things would be a lot different. Many could not sleep the eve of June 11th in anticipation of the 1955 24 Hours of Le Mans. It was going to be an exciting event because the three major contenders, Ferrari, Jaguar, and Mercedes-Benz, had arrived with new and improved cars. Ferrari was the previous year's champion, and their car was very fast. The Jaguar team lived for Le Mans. So not only was their car perfect, but their lineup, which included Formula One Ferrari driver Mike Hawthorne, was also very impressive. Then the Mercedes-Benz team was a whole different ballgame. The German team had conquered Formula One that year and still proceeded to crush its opponents at the World Sports Car Championship. This was done with their newly released 300 SLR. This car was a star. It featured a body made of an ultra-lightweight magnesium alloy called Electron that made the car glide on the tracks. It also had other impressive components, but it had a little flaw. Its braking system, which comprised drum brakes and a large air brake, was less effective than the modern disc brakes on the rival Jaguar D-Type. Regardless of this, the team's manager set up a race team comprising only the best drivers. Juan Manuel Fangio and Sterling Moss were in the lead car, and the other drivers were 1952 race winner Carl Kling, Andre Simon, John Fitch, and Pierre Levesque. As for the circuit where the race was to be held, nothing much was changed in preparation. It was the same as it was when it was first opened in 1923, only a little shorter. That means the layout that was put in place when the top speeds of cars were still 60 miles per hour was what remained. There was also no barrier between the pit lane and the racing line, and only a 4-foot earthen bank was between the tracks and the spectators. On the fateful day, the race began at 4 p.m. You should have seen how packed the circuit was by 2 p.m. No one wanted to miss a thing. The race began, and just as expected, the lead cars of Eugenio Castellotti of Ferrari, Hawthorne of Jaguar, and Fangio of Mercedes-Benz were in the lead. The other cars for the teams were not far behind either. The race was exciting as the three teams exchanged places in the first hour. However, going into the second, Castellotti started dropping back, leaving Hawthorne and Fangio to continue the battle for the lead. Unfortunately, things took a bloody turn going into the third hour. On the 35th lap, Hawthorne and Fangio were going neck to neck. In Hawthorne's biography, he described the moment saying he was momentarily mesmerized by the legend of the Mercedes' superiority. Then I came to my senses and thought, damn it, why should a German car beat a British car? The lap before, Hawthorne's pit crew had called for him to come in the next lap. He had just lapped Mercedes driver Levesque, who was in 6th place, at one of the corners of the racetrack, and was determined to stay ahead of Fangio as long as he could. So, he didn't agree to pit until the 35th lap, which he thought was ideal. As he was coming out of the Maison Blanc portion of the course, he went ahead of Lance Macklin's Austin Healey 100S, who had seen him coming and moved over to let him through. Then, after putting another lap on Macklin, Hawthorne raised his hand to signal that he was pitting and pulled across to the right. This was where everything went awfully wrong. As Macklin saw Hawthorne approaching again, he braked hard, ran off the right edge of the track, and threw up dust. Then he noticed Hawthorne slowing down and heading towards him on the right. He swerved left to avoid the Jaguar driver. He didn't know that the Jaguar's brakes were so effective that there was no need to swerve so swiftly. Unfortunately, he did, and the result was his car skewing into the center of the track. Before Macklin could adjust his car, Levesque of the Mercedes team was approaching at over 120 miles per hour. The Mercedes driver who was in front of Fangio had the intention of doing another lap swiftly. He never got to complete that lap. As he closed in on Macklin, Levesque knew there was no way he could brake quickly enough to stop a crash from happening. Remember that the Mercedes brakes were unimpressive, so he raised his hand to alert Fangio of the imminent disaster, probably the last thing he did before his car blew into smithereens. Levesque's front right wheel rode up onto the rear left corner of Macklin's car. This acted as a ramp that launched Levesque's car into the air, flying over spectators and rolling continuously for 80 meters. The poor driver was thrown out of the car. Yeah, the race cars had no seatbelts at the time. Ironically, drivers asked for seatbelts to be removed because they'd rather be thrown out during an accident than be burnt to death. So, Levesque was thrown out of the car and hit the ground head first, flattening his skull on impact. He died instantly. The critical twist in the road put the car on a direct path towards the cramped terraces and grandstand. The car landed on the earth embankment between the spectators and the track, but didn't stop there. It bounced, then slammed into a concrete stairwell structure and shattered. It was an absolutely crazy sight to see. The heaviest bits of the car, the engine, radiator, and suspension, flew straight on into the crowd for almost 100 meters. Everything on its path was wiped. The bonnet lid hacked through the air like a deadly boomerang, decapitating tightly jammed spectators like a flying guillotine. Spectators who had climbed onto ladders and platforms to get a better view all fell victim. Jaguar driver Duncan Hamilton, who had been watching from the pit wall, shared, "The scene on the other side of the road was indescribable. The dead and dying were everywhere. The cries of pain, anguish, and despair screamed catastrophe. I stood as if in a dream, too horrified to even think. If only Hamilton knew the worst was yet to come." When the rest of Levesque's car landed on the embankment, it shattered. But something else happened. The rear-mounted fuel tank exploded. The burning car was lethal as it is, but things became even worse when the fuel fire increased the temperature of the remaining Electron bodywork past its ignition temperature. The Electron, which was made mainly of magnesium, had a lower ignition temperature than that of other metals. So, when the ignition temperature was reached, the alloy burst into white-hot flames, and a fiery rain of Electron descended on the helpless spectators. With everyone scampering for safety, things became extremely chaotic. To compound the situation, the rescue team knew nothing about putting out magnesium fires, so they tried putting it out with water, which greatly intensified the flames. The fire raged on for hours. As if Levesque's car hadn't done enough harm, Macklin's vehicle also caused havoc of its own. The car, which was heavily damaged, crushed the left side barrier and skidded to the right of the track into the pit lane, narrowly missing the cars that were refueling in the pit before the accident. The car then hit the unprotected pit wall, running down a policeman, a photographer, and 2 officials. Afterwards, it bounced back across the track towards the left side fence for a second time. It's a wonder how Macklin survived the incident without serious injuries. All of these happened in less than 10 seconds. The sight that followed the disaster was heart-wrenching. Bodies of the dead and injured were wheeled out of the circuit. People close to the incident were screaming and calling out for their loved ones. Levesque's wife, who had watched everything unfold, was inconsolable, and drivers were completely distraught. Hawthorne, who couldn't believe how everything spiraled out of control, was ordered to do another lap to get away from danger. When he pit stopped during the next lap, he stumbled out of his car with weak knees, certain that he had caused the disaster. Other drivers on his team had to continue the race. Mercedes-Benz withdrew from the race, as they should. They had suffered the most casualties, and it would be insensitive to continue. All the Ferraris went out of commission, so they were also out. The Jaguar team kept going, despite Hawthorne's initial state of distraught, and went ahead to win the trophy. That came as no surprise, as their competition was out of the picture. At the end of the race, the death toll reached between 80 to 84, including Levesque, and either by flying debris or from the white fire, a further 120 to 178 got injured. The next morning, a mass was held in the Le Mans Cathedral for the first funerals of the victims. It was an awful incident, and nothing can be compared to it so far. If you're wondering why the race was not red flagged and stopped entirely, well, the race director, Charles Faroux, said it was out of his control. He further explained that it was a smart decision, because if the huge crowd of spectators had tried to leave en masse, it would have been difficult for medical and emergency crews trying to save the injured. He also pointed out that firms participating in the race could have sued the race organizers for huge sums of money. However, despite the race being completed, there were great repercussions. There was an immediate ban of motorsports in Spain, France, West Germany, and other nations until tracks could be made safer. Although most countries lifted their racing bans a year later, Switzerland didn't lift its ban until May of 2022. The devastation of the accident was deeply felt. We hope nothing of the sort ever happens again. Currently, no one is blamed for the accident, but at the time, all fingers pointed at Hawthorne. Mercedes-Benz and other teams shared that if Hawthorne hadn't cut into the front of Macklin and slammed onto the brakes near the pit's entrance, Macklin wouldn't have spun out of control and ended up in Levesque's path. Then some level of blame was placed on the fire marshals for not knowing the proper way to extinguish the fire. It's believed that if they had immediately put out the fire, the situation wouldn't have become so bad. But everyone agrees that if the race organizers had put proper safety measures in place, the disaster might have never happened. So, what do you think about the whole incident? And who do you think was to blame? Kindly let us know in the comments section. Talking about safety, you should know that Formula One FIA doesn't joke around with safety and has taken cogent steps to ensure the drivers and spectators are never in harm's way. If you liked this video, take a look at some of our previous videos. I'm sure you'll like them.